All right, let's dive right in. Today, we are taking a whirlwind tour through the meteoric rise, the musical revolution, and the unbelievable legacy of the Beatles. So, to get started, let's just try to wrap our heads around the sheer scale we're talking about here. 600 million? That's the estimated number of records, CDs, you name it, that the Beatles have sold all over the world. It makes them the best-selling music act of all time. But honestly, the numbers, they don't even tell half the story. And that's the big question, isn't it? How on earth did it happen? How did John, Paul, George, and Ringo go from playing in gritty little clubs to becoming these global icons who completely reshaped music, and all of it in just a single decade? Okay, so Act 1. The story doesn't start in some glamorous, polished recording studio. Nope. It starts in the rough and tumble, sweaty clubs of Hamburg, Germany. This is where they really cut their teeth and forge that raw energy. Now, just look at this timeline for a second. The speed of it all is just insane. In 1960, they're basically a bar band playing all-night sets. 2 years later, Ringo's in, they've got their first hit. By 63, the entire UK is in an absolute frenzy. And by the start of 64, they're landing in America, about to detonate a cultural bomb. And this is the explosion point. 73 million people. That's how many Americans were glued to their TV sets to watch their first performance on The Ed Sullivan Show. At the time, it was the biggest television audience in American history. The British invasion hadn't just begun, it had officially arrived. The press needed a word for what was going on, and Beatlemania was just perfect. You have to understand, this wasn't just fans liking a band. This was something else entirely, a genuine cultural phenomenon. The screaming was often so loud you literally couldn't even hear the music. It was proof of this incredible connection and energy that pop music had never seen before. But here's where the story takes a turn. Just as fast as they conquered the world's stages, they walked away from them. In 1966, completely burned out from the chaos of touring, the Beatles made a shocking decision. No more live shows. They would become a studio-only band. And that single choice didn't just change their career, it changed the future of music itself. And this really shows you the stark contrast, the before and after. They went from that relentless grind of touring, where you had to play simple, loud songs just to be heard over the screaming, to a completely different universe. The recording studio became their new instrument, their own personal laboratory where they could do whatever they wanted, with no limits. And man, did they get creative in that lab. They started pioneering stuff that's totally standard now, but was unheard of then. They'd play tapes backwards, mess with recording speeds, bring in instruments from other cultures like the sitar, and use brand new tech like the mellotron. They weren't just writing songs anymore. They were building entire worlds out of sound. You know, their producer, the legendary George Martin, he put it perfectly. He said, they used to make albums that were just, a bunch of singles thrown together. But now they were starting to see the album itself as a complete work of art, from the first track to the last. And the absolute peak of this era was, of course, Sgt. Pepper's. This wasn't just an album, it was a cultural event. It completely revolutionized how people thought about records. And it became the very first rock album ever to win the Grammy for Album of the Year. That was a huge deal. But here's the thing. That same intense, creative fire that made them so brilliant also started to pull them in different directions. As each of them grew as artists, their own tastes and their own ambitions began to diverge, and you started to see the cracks forming. In fact, years later, both John and Paul would point to the recording sessions for the White Album as the real beginning of the end. If you listen to it, it sounds less like a unified band and more like 4 brilliant solo artists who just happened to be recording in the same building. So yeah, there wasn't one single reason they broke up. It was more like a perfect storm. You had massive business disagreements over who should manage their money. You had growing creative clashes. John wanted to be more experimental. Paul was still writing amazing pop songs. And you had some pretty intense personal tensions, especially with Yoko Ono's constant presence in the studio, which broke a long-standing rule. And in a way that just feels so perfect for them, their very last public performance was a total surprise. They just went up on the roof of their office building in London and started playing. It was this iconic, joyful, rebellious moment, right up until the police showed up and shut them down. The official end didn't happen all at once. It was more like a slow, painful process.
First, John told the rest of the band he was leaving in late '69. The public didn't know until the next April, when Paul announced he was out too. And then the final official nail in the coffin came when Paul had to file a lawsuit just to dissolve the whole thing for good.
So the band was over. But their influence? Oh, that was just getting started. In just 10 short years, they had built a legacy that would echo for generations to come.
I mean, it's almost impossible to overstate their impact. They basically invented the modern music video. They completely changed fashion. They became these huge icons of the counterculture. But most of all, they showed the world that pop music could be more than just simple entertainment. It could actually be a powerful force for change.
And hey, if you just want to talk about straight-up success, they're still untouchable. Just look at this: 20 #1 singles in the US. It's a record that still stands today. They remain the most successful act in the history of the American charts, period.
And it's not just about the sales. Decades after they broke up, the critical acclaim is still there. Publications like Rolling Stone consistently, and I mean consistently, put them right at the top, the greatest artist of all time. It just goes to show you how their music hasn't just lasted, it still feels fresh and revolutionary today. Which kind of brings us to a final thought. With a legacy this massive, touching everything from music and technology to culture and fashion, what do you think was their single greatest contribution? Was it a song? Was it an album? Or was it just the idea that 4 working-class kids from Liverpool could, in fact, change the world?